"Where are the other 9?" Jesus asks. 10 were healed. Only 1 came back to say and give thanks. And as I ponder this story, I have often imagined in my mind the many reasons 9 may not give thanks. It could be they were just ready to get on with their lives, ready to get back to their families, to their loved ones, and they just didn't think about giving thanks. It could be they're so filled with joy and happiness that they're feeling that they're merrily skipping down the road that they just simply forgot. I think they all felt gratitude. There might have been 1 or 2 who were so filled with bitterness about what they had experienced as unclean people, they could not conjure any sense of gratitude for what had happened to them. So for whatever reason, 9 did not return and give thanks. So when I read this story, I don't hear Jesus' words as about where are the 9 necessarily as a condemnation or even an accusation. I think he had a sense of empathy with them. That this story on a cursory level isn't some story about a morality tale to teach our kids to say please and thank you like I try to teach my grandsons. Politeness is a value I hope they learn. This isn't some story to simply remind us to say thank you to God, thank you before dinner, thank you before bed. Good things for sure, but something I think more is going on in these few verses. And the something going on is asking this question. Not why the other 9 didn't show up. Why did this one man come back? Give thanks. That, to me, is the more interesting story. What brings this one man, walking down the road, healed as he journeys, as he's been told by Jesus, go see the priest, as he's walking down the road, what makes him, and this is the text says, turn back? It's kind of a little bit similar to the story last week. It occurred to me when we read about, or we heard about Moses at the burning bush. There was a sense in which, and the phrase was, Moses is taking care of his sheep, and he turns, when he glimpses something out of the corner of his eye, he turns back, he turns aside and sees God. So what was it about this man that not only feeling gratitude, he turns back and goes the other direction? What's different about him than the others? What stopped him in his tracks? That it was important enough to turn back and express his thanks. What opens up in him his gratitude, his ability to see the gift that was given by God? Why this man? Why this Samaritan? Now, I would pose to you, this isn't simply a philosophical, theological question. Many psychologists, philosophers, spiritual directors understand that gratitude is really an essential component of joy in our lives, a central component of experiencing joy in our lives. Without a capacity to feel grateful, we lose something. Without a way of experiencing gratitude, we lose an experience of life that is essential. We can go about the busyness and business of life not really being aware of all the gifts that come to us in so many ways, small and large. As probably one of my all-time favorite quotes from one of the first church theologians in the first century, who says and wrote, "God gives us gifts every day, but our hands are too full to receive them." God gives us gifts every day, but our eyes too blind to perceive them. So why was the Samaritan able to perceive, to receive, to acknowledge the gift he'd been given? And Luke, I would say, gives us a hint in the very first verses of this story. Luke makes it a point to describe Jesus, and in 17th chapter of Luke, he's on his way to Jerusalem to describe Jesus traveling on the border. I mean, it's an interesting detail to give in the story, but on the border between Galilee, which is a poor rural province, and Samaria, which is, as I have said earlier, a despised region with people considered heretical and enemies of God. Jesus, his point, travels in the borderlands, seeking out those who live at the edges: lepers, the poor, the possessed, the disenfranchised, all the broken and the lost and the lonely, because, according to Luke, Jesus lives and heals and teaches and loves, if I might put it this way, in the borderlands. And this is one of the central themes of the Gospel of Luke, is how God, embodied in Jesus, is always seeking out those in the borderlands, both physical, social, and spiritual. The Samaritan lives in the borderlands of his disease, his disorder, his physical condition, so visible for all to see, for all to claim as unclean. He lives in the borderlands of social isolation, his very appearance leading to exclusion and claims of uncleanness. And in his world, he lives in the borderlands of his religion, his faith. He's supposedly spiritually lost, spiritually abandoned by God. But Jesus shows up in the borderlands. This man is healed, and in this profound gift, out of nowhere, unexpectedly, undeserved, unearned, as he journeys where Jesus told him, he turns back and gives thanks. Why? So I'll propose an idea to you that may be a little startling. I think it's because he is a Samaritan. A Samaritan who knows and occupies the borderlands. That in some ways his experience of the borderlands enables him to really, truly see and appreciate deeply the miraculous gift that he was given. While the others might take it for granted, maybe something they think they deserved, they didn't have the experience of a Samaritan. It was the very nature of being a Samaritan that he was able to appreciate the gift. True gratitude is never taken for granted. Now, you might think that an odd thing to say, but I have seen those who live in the borderlands open far more to gratitude than I. ever, who has never really lived there. I know Amgad and Doug and Julie went physically, truly, literally down to the borderlands down south, and I'm sure they will share stories of their journey there. But I have been there before, and in many ways that border between Mexico and the United States is some of the poorest, most profoundly depressing, challenging things to see. But what you discover if you go down there is a people of gratitude. Fully generous. Fully welcoming. Those of us who've gone to El Salvador, the poorest of the poor in the mountains outside Berlin in El Salvador. And what we go there and we are people living in dirt floors and these barely put together homes, and yet what we find there is a people who express and experience a profound sense of gratitude for what gets them through each day. I know I experienced that when I went to Palestine, Israel a few years ago. I went to the borderland. You talk about a borderland, but in that place, in those conditions, we cannot imagine, and yet somehow we were welcomed and embraced and given such generous presence, in the sense of their presence. And I think it's because if you live in the borderland, you catch a glimpse of the gifts needed in our lives. The refugees, the immigrants we've gotten to know in our congregation, our church, our community, are people who know the borderlands, don't they? In them, and I would say this is from Fossil, came from Afghanistan to Shama and his family, coming from Africa. They're leaving one country to come to another. They know and can teach us true gratitude for the kindness of strangers, for the gifts of God day to day. Rather, I think in our world in which we fear the immigrant and we fear the refugee, we should learn from them. Because they can teach us what it really means to give thanks. With a God who shows up and sustains them, whether it is a church or people of the church, or whether it is in that way, they can profoundly say and give thanks. People who occupy the borderlands might not just be in a physical way, but it also can be when all of us have times in our lives in which we experience difficult, challenging times, whether that's an illness or a diagnosis, or whether it might be a profound loss we find in the borderland of grief, and we find ourselves in our lives somehow stripped away of the things we take for granted, and yet over and over in that borderland we understand and fully can embrace the truth that gifts sustain us. We finally pay attention to it. These gifts sustain us each and every day. The power of being in the borderlands, even in those times which cause us great fear and anxiety, is that we're finally stripped away and open and can give thanks. To be clear, Jesus in our story this morning isn't celebrating the Samaritan just because he came back, he turned back and said thank you. It's important to make that distinction. It's not like Jesus needed or craved a thank you. It's not like God needs or craves a thank you. He tells the Samaritan who's turned back, who's come back and said, I thank you. He tells him, your faith has made you well. Then what does he mean by that? It's not like he took away the healing of the other 9 because they didn't turn back and give thanks. They didn't express their gratitude. It's not like the healing was dependent on them saying thank you. So when Jesus tells the Samaritan, your faith has made you well, the Greek here could be understood and translated as your faith has made you whole and complete. Your faith has saved you. And faith here doesn't mean some statement about God or about the nature of God. Faith here doesn't mean some assertion about who God is or who Jesus is. Faith is this capacity, this ability to perceive the gifts of God and to acknowledge them. Faith is a capacity to experience awe and wonder, even and most especially at the borderlands. Faith is opening our eyes and our hands and speaking our gratitude to the universe. To God be the glory this day and forevermore. Amen.